The town of Glenwood Junction existed where the railroad tracks met the telegraph wires, a small knot in the long ropes that tied the country together. It was a place the world passed through, a brief sigh of steam and sound before the landscape swallowed the trains once more. In a small office right beside those tracks, where the window panes rattled with every passing locomotive, lived the town's listener. Her name was Eleanor Reed. She was 27 years old, and her world was made of rhythm and sound. From morning until night, she sat at a polished wooden desk, her fingers resting lightly on a brass key, her ear tuned to the chattering machine beside her. This was the telegraph sounder, a device that spoke in a sharp, clear language of clicks and clacks. Each sequence was a letter. Each pause was a space. Together, they formed words that rushed along the silver wires stretching from her office to everywhere else. Eleanor translated these sounds. She would hear the staccato bursts, and her pencil would fly across the thick yellow paper of her message pad, turning code into news. She received reports of snow on the mountain passes, so the trains would know to slow down. She took orders for the general store from salesmen in faraway cities. Most often, she wrote down the personal messages from the people of Glenwood, the telegrams that held their heartbeats. A son assuring his mother of his safe arrival. A farmer confirming the price of sheep. A simple, powerful message like "Love you, mother," sent from a distant city. She was careful and swift, and the townspeople were grateful. Yet to them, she was part of the machine. They would not politely hand her their written words and wait for her to click them into existence. They saw the messenger, but they did not see the woman. When their replies came back, she would transcribe them and send Billy, the delivery boy, to carry the paper to its recipient. She was the first to know their news, both happy and sad, but she was never part of it. Outside her office, December deepened. Wreaths appeared on doors. The scent of pine and wood smoke hung in the cold air. Children's laughter sounded sharper, carrying further in the frost. Eleanor watched it from her post. She had a small sprig of evergreen on her mantle and a single, wrapped gift from her sister in Concord. It was a quiet life, a solitary life. The snow began to fall on Christmas Eve, softly at first, then with a determined steadiness that promised to blanket the world in silence. As the blue twilight faded to black, Eleanor knew the workday was done. The wires fell into their nighttime hum, a low, empty sound. She pulled her shawl a little tighter and looked out at the main street. Lamplight glowed in the windows of the houses. She could see shapes moving inside. Fam was gathering. She thought of the messages she had sent that day, all those fragments of connection crisscrossing the country, and felt the peculiar loneliness of the switchboard, the point where everything connected except her. She turned from the window, deciding to brew a pot of tea before retiring to her room upstairs. The office was so quiet she could hear the tall clock tick. It was in this deep hush that her machine suddenly came alive. The sound was not the hurried business rhythm she knew so well. It was slower, deliberate. Each click and clack was spaced with intention, like someone choosing each word with great care. It was the difference between a shout and a spoken secret. Her hand, from pure habit, reached for the pencil. Her other hand steadied the message pad. She leaned in, her brow furrowed, as the letters began to form in her mind, translating the pulses of sound into meaning. The first words made her pause, her pencil hovering above the paper. It was not addressed to the grocer or the station master. It was not for anyone in Glenwood at all. The message was coming in for no one, and for everyone, and as she began to write it down, a strange feeling began to uncurl within her, a feeling she had not felt in a very long time. It was the feeling of being addressed, directly, under the vast, indifferent sky of wires, on a cold Christmas Eve. The wind outside seemed to hold its breath. The only sound in the small office was the purposeful language of the telegraph machine and the soft, steady scratch of Eleanor's pencil. Her entire world had narrowed to the movements of the sounder's armature and the line of text growing on her yellow pad. This was not a transmission. It was a visitation. The opening address had been clear. To all who are listening, from a fellow traveler on a quiet night. Eleanor's practical mind noted the improper format, the lack of a paying customer or a destination code. But her heart, so accustomed to the dry grammar of commerce and simple news, stumbled over the poetry that followed. She transcribed the clicks into words that felt unfamiliar in her professional ledger. The wires are veins of silver tonight. Her pencil moved, capturing the elegant sentiment. Carrying not commerce nor news, she wrote, her usual swift hand slowing to match the deliberate pace of the sending. But the light of distant windows, the echo of bells across snow, the warm breath of a prayer spoken to the cold, Eleanor's breath caught. She was a woman of precise words and measured phrases. Telegrams cost by the word. Poetry was a luxury no one sent over the wires. Yet here it was, painting pictures in her mind's eye. She could see those distant windows, golden squares of warmth in a dark countryside. She could almost hear the faint, clear sound of bells carried on the frozen air. The office around her, with its filing cabinets and rate charts, seemed to dissolve, replaced by the vast, silent, starlit landscape the message conjured. Then it spoke to her dot to the operator in the quiet office. The pencil point pressed so hard it nearly tore the paper. Someone knew she was here. Someone, out there in the network of the night, was thinking of the person at the other end of the line. Your hand is the conduit. You connect the seas and scatter joy. You hear the heartbeat of the world, though it never speaks your name. Tears, sudden and hot, pricked at the corners of her eyes. It was as if a locked door deep inside her had been gently tapped open. The loneliness of her post, the silent observation of other people's lives, the feeling of being a ghost in the machine of human connection, it was all named in that simple sentence. It never speaks your name. She blinked rapidly, forcing herself to focus on the remaining clicks. Do not mistake solitude for emptiness. The quietest room can hold the whole song. The words settled over her like a blanket. They did not dismiss her loneliness. They transformed it. They called it a quiet room, a vessel, not a void. May you hear in the clicks and silences tonight a message meant for you, a final series of letters formed. You are not a relay, but a recipient. You are not a point on the line, but a light upon it. May this night bring you the very thing you carry for others, connection. Merry Christmas. The sounder clicked one last time, the sign for end of transmission, and then went still. The familiar, hollow hum of the open wire returned, a sound that usually meant nothing. Now it felt like the ringing silence after a beautiful piece of music. Eleanor did not move. She stared at the completed message on her pad. The flowing cursive of her own handwriting held words that did not belong to her, yet felt addressed directly to her soul. The paper seemed to glow in the lamplight. A fellow traveler on a quiet night. Who? Another operator, surely, sitting in another lonely office much like her own. Someone who knew the weight of the silence. Someone who decided to cast this beautiful, bottled message into the river of the wire, not knowing who would find it. She had found it. In all of Glenwood Junction, perhaps in all the world along that wire, she was the one listening. The message meant for no one in town had, by some miraculous chance, found the one person who needed to hear it most. She was not just the conduit. She was the recipient, the quiet room holding the song. She reached out one trembling finger and touched the edge of the paper, making sure it was real. It was, and for the first time that long, cold winter, Eleanor Reed did not feel alone. Asterisk, asterisk. For a long time, Eleanor simply sat in the profound quiet. The usual night sounds returned, the squeak of a floorboard settling, the soft hiss of the lantern, the distant moan of the wind. But they were different now. They were the sounds of the quiet room holding the song. The message lay before her, a pool of impossible words on a sea of yellow paper. Her practical mind, trained by years of procedure, now wrestled with a problem no manual had ever covered. What did one do with a telegram that had no recipient? Her first instinct was professional. This was an irregular transmission. It had no billing code, no customer signature. Proper protocol suggested she should file it under anomalies, or perhaps even discard it. Her hand hovered over the waste paper basket, but she could not make her fingers release the page. To throw it away felt like throwing away a found treasure, like ignoring a clear, kind voice that had spoken her name in the dark. It was hers. That was the undeniable truth beating in her chest. The fellow traveler had sent it out into the void, and the void in Glenwood Junction was her office, was her own heart. She had been the one listening. The words about conduits and quiet rooms and songs, they were for her. A fierce, protective feeling rose in her. This message was a gift. It was the only Christmas present that had truly found her this year, but a gift needed to be honored. It needed to be beheld. She could not just lock it in a drawer. It fell to alive for that dot her eyes wandered the small office, landing on the public bulletin board. It was a practical thing, nailed to the wall beside the ticket window. It held train schedules, a faded notice about a lost dog, an advertisement for woolen socks. It was where the town looked for information. A thought, delicate as a snowflake, crystallized in her mind. The message was for all who are listening. Perhaps it did not have to end with her. Perhaps the gift could be passed on Dot with a new sense of purpose. She opened her top desk drawer. Inside, amidst the spare pencils and rubber stamps, was a small spool of red ribbon. She used it only for special occasions, to tie up particularly important legal documents or official notices. It was the only thing in the office that felt like ceremony. She carefully tore the message page from her pad. She smoothed its edges, her touch gentle. She cut a length of the red ribbon, and with fingers that only trembled a little, she tied it around the paper. She made a simple bow. The act felt significant, like wrapping a precious object. The stark black script was now framed by the cheerful red. The official telegram transformed into a holiday card. Eleanor rose from her chair. The floorboards creaked under her feet as she walked the few steps to the bulletin board. She unpinned the outdated notice about the harvest dance, letting it flutter to the counter below. In its place, she pinned her message. The red bow stood out brightly against the dull corkboard. She stepped back to look at it. There it was, a strange and beautiful foreign object amidst the mundane announcements. It needed an explanation, a permission for others to look. She took a fresh slip of paper and wrote, in her neatest hand, a simple caption. She pinned it just below the ribbon. Received Christmas Eve, 1923, for anyone who needs it. She returned to her chair, but she did not sit. She stood behind her counter, looking at the message on the wall. A quiet panic mixed with her wonder. What would people think? Would they laugh at the poetry? Would they find it foolish? Would they dismiss it as a waste of wire? She was exposing a piece of her own soul, she realized, by sharing this message that had so deeply spoken to her, yet the words themselves gave her courage. The quietest room can hold the whole song. Her office was that room. She was letting the song out. Whether anyone else heard the melody was not her responsibility. Her duty was simply to have listened, and now to have posted the lyrics. The clock struck 9:30. Outside, the snow had stopped. The world was a pristine white blanket under a sky now scattered with stars. Eleanor finally blew out the office lamp. In the darkness, the red ribbon was just a deeper shadow on the wall. But she knew it was there. She locked the office door and climbed the narrow stairs to her room, the mysterious words echoing in her mind not as a problem solved, but as a promise now shared. The message was no longer a secret. It was an invitation. Christmas morning dawned bright and brittle over Glenwood Junction. Sunlight glared off the new snow, turning the world into a diamond. Eleanor came downstairs early, her stomach a knot of nervous anticipation. She stirred the coals in the office stove into warmth, the routine action steadying her hands. She kept glancing at the bulletin board. The message was still there, its red ribbon a vivid splash against the cork. It looked both daring and fragile. The first visitor was Mr. Henderson, the grocer. He bustled in just after 8, his round cheeks red from the cold. "Morning, Miss Reed. Just need to send a quick one to my boy in Boston. Forgot to wish him a Merry Christmas proper last night." He stomped snow from his boots, his eye scanning the board for the eastbound train schedule. They snagged on the red ribbon and paused. "Odd bit of post you have there," he remarked, leaning closer. He adjusted his spectacles and began to read aloud, his voice a low rumble. To all who were listening, he read slowly through the lines about silver veins and quiet rooms. When he finished, he was quiet for a long moment. He turned to Eleanor, his usual businesslike manner softened. That's a peculiar thing. A fellow traveler, eh? He looked out the window toward the tracks heading east. My James is a telegraph man for the railroad out near Albany. Works the night shift sometimes. He nodded, as if answering a question nobody had asked. Yes. Well, he dictated his short, cheerful message to his son, but his mind seemed elsewhere. He paid for the wire, and instead of leaving immediately, he turned back to the board and read the poem once more. For anyone who needs it, he murmured, reading her note. He gave Eleanor a thoughtful look, a look that saw her, perhaps for the first time, as more than the operator. A very Merry Christmas to you, Miss Reed. He left, the door closing softly behind him. Next came Miss Dalrymple, the elderly school teacher. She needed to send a New Year's greeting to a sister in Philadelphia. Her sharp eyes, used to spotting errors in grammar, found the message immediately. Oh, she said, a small sound of surprise. She read it in perfect silence, her lips moving slightly with the words. When she reached the end, she let out a soft sigh. How perfectly beautiful. She turned to Eleanor. It speaks of carrying the season's scattered joy. That is precisely what a teacher does, is it not? We gather up the scattered bits of knowledge and try to make them into a song for the children. She smiled, a rare, warm expression. And you, my dear, you are our conduit. We never think to thank you for that. Miss Dalrymple sent her telegram, but she lingered, standing beside Eleanor to look at the board again. Sharing the quiet companionship of people who appreciate the same line of poetry, throughout the morning, it happened again and again. The railroad conductor, reading it on his break, nodded solemnly. A light upon the line. That's a fine way to put it. A young mother, waiting to send word to her husband away on business, read the line about the warm breath of a prayer and blinked back tears. It feels like a blessing, doesn't it? She said to Eleanor, the telegraph office, usually a place of quick in and out, became a place of pause. People came in, their minds on their own messages, but they would stop at the board. They would read. They would think. And then, remarkably, they would often speak to each other. The grocer would say to the teacher, "Makes you think of those working the night, doesn't it?" The conductor would remark to the young mother, quietest room holding the whole song, "I like that." Eleanor watched this from behind her counter, a quiet witness to a small miracle. The message, meant for no one, was speaking to everyone. It was not giving them the same thing. It was a key that unlocked different chambers in different hearts. For some, it was comfort for loneliness. For others, it was recognition for their quiet work. For a few, it was simply a moment of unexpected beauty on a cold morning. The gift had been passed on. The song in her quiet room was now a gentle hum passing through the whole town. People did not just nod at her anymore. They met her eyes. They included her in their conversation. They wished her a Merry Christmas with a new kind of sincerity. The message had done more than hang on a wall. It had, in its own gentle way, begun to weave a thread of connection through Glenwood Junction, and it had drawn Eleanor, the silent operator, into the very center of the pattern. A curious energy settled over Glenwood in the days between Christmas and the New Year. The mystery of the red ribbon message became a gentle town obsession. People dropped by the telegraph office on thin pretenses, just to glance at the board again. They speculated in the general store and over backyard fences. Who was the fellow traveler? Was it a lonely soul like Miss Reed? Was it a wise poet somewhere? The grocer's theory that it was another railroad operator, like his son James, gained the most traction. It felt logical, a voice from within their own understood world of wires and schedules. Eleanor found herself at the heart of this friendly mystery. For the first time, townspeople asked for her opinion. "What do you think, Miss Reed?" The school teacher would inquire. "You're the expert on the wires." The attention was unnerving, but also warm. She was no longer invisible. She was their translator, their link to the mystery. This new role stirred a professional curiosity in her. She was a telegraph operator. Solving puzzles of communication was her craft. Could she find the source? The idea felt daring, almost like reaching back into the dark to touch the hand that had offered the gift. It was a way to say thank you, to complete the circuit. On a quiet afternoon, she composed a careful inquiry. She addressed it to the main telegraph office in Concord, the nearest big hub. Using the clear, concise language of her trade, she described the unusual message received on Christmas Eve at the Glenwood Junction station. She noted the time, the distinctive phrasing, and the lack of routing codes. She asked, politely, if any operator recalls sending or routing such a personal greeting. She sent the message and waited. The reply came the next day. It was brief and official. The Concord office had no record of such a transmission. They suggested it may have been a stray signal, improperly routed, and wished her a good day. Undeterred, Eleanor cast her net wider. She sent similar inquiries to operators into major cities she knew were on the same main line, using the Telegraph directory. The answers were variations on the same theme. No one knew anything. One reply from a harried-sounding operator in a busy city office was almost curt. We handle hundreds of Christmas greetings. Cannot trace poetry. Stop. Eleanor felt a flicker of defeat. Perhaps it truly was just a beautiful error, a message lost forever from its intended recipient. The thought made her sad. Such lovely words should have a home. Then, 2 days later, a reply arrived with a different tone. It was from an operator in a distant city, a man named Mr. Phillips, whose return address showed decades of experience. His message was slower, more considerate, as if he had taken time to think. Your query recalled an old custom. Stop, Eleanor read, leaning closer to the sounder. In the early days of the wire, late on Christmas Eve, a few old-timers would send a greeting down the line. Stop. No address. No name. Just a wish for peace to the next listener. Stop. A ghost of the wires. They called it. Stop. A tradition that faded with the busier times. Stop. Perhaps your fellow traveler is a ghost with a fine turn of phrase. Stop. Merry New Year to Glenwood Junction. Stop. Eleanor sat back, the paper in her hand. A ghost of the wires. The phrase sent a shiver through her that was not unpleasant. It was not a mistake. It was not a lost message. It was a tradition, a deliberate act of fellowship sent into the silent night, hoping to find a listening ear. Her search was over. She would not find a name or a town. The fellow traveler was exactly what they called themselves, a traveler, a voice passing through. But Mr. Phillips's message confirmed the most important truth. The Christmas greeting was intentional. It was meant to be found by someone, anyone, who was listening. She pinned Mr. Phillips's message on the bulletin board next to the red ribbon poem. She added her own small note beneath it, a tradition called a ghost of the wires. The people of Glenwood read this new clue with great satisfaction. The mystery had not been solved, but it had been honored. It had a history. Their message was part of a long, thin line of human kindness strung along the silver wires. For Eleanor, the knowledge settled deep in her soul. The gift had not been misplaced. It had been sent for her. The ghost in the machine had, for one silent night, become a friend. And in learning of the tradition, she realized she was now a part of it. She was a keeper of the story. She was a listener who had been found. The knowledge that the message was part of a quiet tradition changed something fundamental in Eleanor. It was as if she had been handed a torch in a dark hallway. Before, she had been a careful custodian of other people's light, passing it along without letting it touch her. Now, she felt its warmth on her own skin. The fellow traveler had not just sent words. They had passed on a responsibility, a way of being in the world. A conduit was not a cold pie. It was a living connection. She began, very subtly, to alter her own rhythm within the click and clack of her days. The change started small, a shift in tone rather than a breach of protocol, when young Tom Miller came in, flustered and proud, to send the news of his newborn daughter to his parents in Vermont. Eleanor did not just impassively count the words. She transcribed his joyful, stumbling message, and as she read it back to him for confirmation, she looked up and smiled, a true, wide smile that reached her eyes. Congratulations, Tom. That is wonderful news. He beamed back, surprised and pleased. Thank you, Miss Reed. It really is. When Mrs. Gable, the station master's wife, received a worried wire from her sick sister, Eleanor handed her the transcribed page with a gentler touch. I'm sorry for the worrying, Mrs. Gable, she said, her voice low. I hope the next news is better. The older woman, usually brisk, grasped Eleanor's hand for a brief moment. Thank you, dear. I hope so too. She no longer simply processed messages. She acknowledged the hearts behind them. She became a participant in the exchange. If a farmer dictated a message about a good price for his wool, she would add, "That is a fine result." If a teenager sent a message to a cousin, she might say, "It's good to keep in touch." These were tiny things, mere fragments of human response, but in the transactional space of the telegraph office, they were revolutions. The townspeople noticed. They did not just see the operator anymore. They saw Eleanor. They began to reciprocate. Mr. Henderson, the grocer, brought her a leftover mince pie from his family's dinner. "Thought you might enjoy a slice," he said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Miss Dalrymple loaned her a book of poetry, noting a piece she thought Eleanor might like. The railroadmen began to tip their hats when they passed the office window. The telegraph office transformed. It remained a place of business, but the air inside grew softer, warmer. People lingered a little longer. They chatted with each other, and they included Eleanor in their conversations. She learned about their families, their hopes, their small daily trials. She became a trusted listener, not just for the wires, but for the town itself. One afternoon, a traveling salesman, waiting to send his daily report, watched this easy back and forth with amazement. "You've got a mighty friendly office here," he remarked to Eleanor. "Not like the cold rooms in the cities." She simply nodded, but inside, she felt a swell of quiet pride. The message on the bulletin board remained, its red ribbon now a little faded, but its meaning had been absorbed into the very walls. Eleanor realized she was living the truth the fellow traveler had described. She was no longer just a point on the line, a relay. She had become a light upon it. Her quiet room was no longer empty. It was filled with the hum of shared humanity, a song composed of greetings and worries, jokes and news, all passing through her listening heart. She had learned to give what she had always carried for others, a moment of recognition, a thread of connection, and in return, the town had woven her into its fabric. She belonged. Another Christmas Eve settled over Glenwood Junction. The same deep snow blanketed the ground, and the same sharp stars pierced the cold, black sky. But inside the small telegraph office, the world had been remade. A small, fragrant balsam first stood in the corner, its branches decorated with strands of cranberries and a few delicate paper stars made by the school children. Mr. Henderson had gifted her the tree. Miss Dalrymple had brought the stars. The room was warm with the glow of two lanterns and the steady heat from the stove. Eleanor sat at her polished desk, the same brass key under her fingers. She listened to the familiar hollow hum of the night wire. It was a sound of possibility now, not loneliness. Over the past year, the office had become a hub. People still came for telegrams, but they also came to share a piece of news, to ask her opinion, or simply to warm themselves by her stove. She was Eleanor Reed, the telegraph operator, a fixed and friendly star in the town's constellation. Her eyes drifted to the bulletin board. The original message, with its faded red ribbon, still held its place of honor, now flanked by Mr. Phillips's note about the tradition and a few other clippings the town had added. It was their story now, a cherished local legend. The fellow traveler felt like a distant, benevolent friend whose visit had changed everything. As the clock's hands crept toward the silent heart of the night, Eleanor felt a deep, peaceful fullness. She had received the greatest gift a year ago, the gift of being seen. Now she thought of the others. She thought of the ghosts of the wires, that old tradition of lonely greeting. She thought of all the operators like her former self, sitting in outposts and way stations, listening to the vast winter silence. They were the ones who knew the weight of the quiet. A quiet conviction bloomed within her. The circuit of kindness needed to be closed. The gift needed to be sent forward. She adjusted her sounder, her movements sure and calm. The night line was open, clear, and still. She knew the rhythms, the patterns of the great network. She placed her fingers on the key. Tonight, she would not wait to receive. Tonight, she would transmit. She began to tap, not in her usual swift business code, but in the slow, deliberate rhythm she had received 1 year before. Each press of the key was a considered choice. A word sent like a paper boat onto a dark river. Her message was not long. It was simple and clear. She addressed it to all fellow travelers on a quiet night. She told them they were heard. She told them their quiet work mattered. She spoke of silver wires beneath the stars and the light that each listening post held against the dark. She wished them peace. She wished them a Merry Christmas. She sent it out into the humming silence, a gift cast back into the stream from which she had once drawn such profound sustenance. She did not use her name or her location. She was simply another voice in the night, another fellow traveler. As the final sign-off clicked into the void, a profound contentment settled over her. She would never know who, in a lonely office on a prairie or in a mountain pass, might receive her words. She would never know if her message would land on a busy board or a private heart. But she knew, with absolute certainty, that it would land somewhere. Someone was listening. The network was not just a tool of commerce. It was a web of human presence, and she was now a conscious part of its weave. She rose and turned down the lanterns. The little tree glimmered in the soft light. The office was ready for tomorrow, for the familiar greetings and the everyday news. Eleanor put on her coat and wrapped a scarf around her neck. She paused at the door, looking back at the room that had once been so empty and now was so full. The click of her key was no longer just a sound. It was her voice. It was a note in the great, shared song. She stepped out into the crystalline night, the snow crunching a cheerful goodbye under her boots. The air was clean and cold. Somewhere, on a wire stretching over sleeping towns and frozen rivers, her message was traveling, a tiny, brave spark in the darkness, carrying the very thing she now possessed in full measure, the sure and certain knowledge of connection, the end.